Welcome to the Red Bull Theater Podcast, where guests discuss all things classical theater with your host, Nathan Winkelstein.
Welcome to the Red Bull Theater Podcast. I am so thrilled to welcome today New York Shakespeare royalty with Hamish Linklater, who has taken some time out of his busy schedule to join us today. Hi, Hamish. How are you?
Great. Not a busy schedule at all. I'm on strike.
Well, that's fair enough, and I guess the theater schedule hasn't picked up fully yet, but maybe we can take advantage of the strike and get you to do more things like this, because it really is a blessing to have you on.
It's a pleasure to be here.
So when I reached out to ask if you'd want to go on, we talked about some various subjects that we might be able to discuss, and we landed on Hamlet, who is somebody who gets discussed a lot, but sometimes needs, I think, he often gets philosophized about instead of explored from a character perspective and an actor perspective. And I think that that's a essential part of the conversation around Hamlet. Obviously, he is a character in a play, and that is how he should be explored. And I was thrilled that you were excited to do it because you've already performed this role twice in your life. Is that correct?
I did it first when I was 27 at Long Wharf, and second when I was 30 at South Coast Rep, and haven't done it in the subsequent 17 years, so I'm terrified to talk about it. But I think I remember a lot. Maybe I don't. We'll see.
Well, this is great. See, there's so much suspense and drama already. And I figured because we're probably going to be exploring Shakespeare or Hamlet as a character overall, I thought our audience likes hearing the wonderful performers I bring on speak a little bit of text. And I thought maybe we should start near the top of Hamlet's journey, because the start is a very good place to start. So you said that you might be willing to take a swing at Too Solid Flesh for Us. Normally, I would give preface to these speeches about what's going on, but Hamlet actually tells us, at least according to him, what's happening in this moment. So I think I will just leave it to Hamlet in your capable hands if you're willing to give that a read.
Yeah. Let's give it a read. It's so good. It's so good that this is his first soliloquy, because, when you're an actor playing this part and you're feeling nervous, as I am now, the first line is pretty apt. And especially if you have any sense of how much play you're going to have to play following this. Okay, let's just try. Oh, that this too solid flesh would melt, thaw, and resolve itself into a dew, or that the everlasting had not fixed his cannon 'gainst self-slaughter. Oh God, God. How weary, stale, flat, and unprofitable seems to me all the uses of this world. Fine, 'tis an unweeded garden that grows to seed things rank and gross in nature, but possess it merely, that it should come to this. But 2 months dead, nay, not so much, not 2, so excellent a king that was to this, Hyperion to a satyr, so loving to my mother, that he might not beteem the winds of heaven visit her face too roughly. Heaven and earth, must I remember? Why, she would hang on him as if increase of appetite had grown by what it fed on, and yet within a month? Let me not think on it. Frailty, thy name is woman. A little month. Or ere those shoes were old, with which she followed my poor father's body, like Niobe, all tears. Why, she, oh God, a beast that wants discourse of reason, would have mourned longer, married with my uncle, my father's brother, but no more like my father than I to Hercules within a month. Ere yet the salt of most unrighteous tears had left the flushing in her galled eyes, she married, oh, most wicked speed to post, with such dexterity to incestuous sheets. It is not, nor it cannot come to good, but break my heart, for I must hold my tongue.
How was it after 17 years?
You know, it's so friggin' cool, that speech. I don't know. It's beautiful, and it's sort of like the simplest, I think, and kind of the most relatable of the soliloquies, or at least it was for me, because he's in grief. The situation is straightforward, and he hasn't been attacked with supernatural forces. He hasn't been tasked with this impossible mission of revenge. He doesn't know yet, and in fact, it takes a long time to convince him that his uncle is in fact the doer of this deed. So it's just a kid dealing with this really awful situation, and the line endings are just fantastic, and the midline stops and all of that.
Yeah, well, and we may get into the weeds of that, because I do think that Hamlet is definitely of that second half of Shakespeare's canon where he seems to be very consciously not punctuating at ends of lines and punctuating in the middle, and what that may give clues to in Hamlet's psyche. But I guess maybe we'll get right back to that, because what has always interested me about Hamlet is how in the world you play it, because it starts out as what it is, which is one of the greatest roles ever written in a 4-hour play that's totally overwhelming. And then on top of that is, of course, this thing that all of the English-speaking world is like, Hamlet, you're playing Hamlet. So when you, as a 27-year-old or as a 30-year-old or as a 47-year-old, go about going, okay, I've got to do Hamlet, how do you begin to get yourself into a place where you can attack this character? What would be your first series of steps be?
Well, I think I remember when when I first got cast to do it, my first thought was, he shouldn't be someone who sort of sits back. I hate the navel-gazing Hamlet, although I've never really seen a navel-gazing Hamlet. But the idea that, you're just sitting there going to be or not to be and lighting up another American spirit is, that's hard to watch for 4 hours. And I think that he is really trying to find the right next step in the journey, in the play, all the way along. And so the question is, why does he go about it the way he does? And there are all these sort of like hinge moments in the plot where you think, oh, he's got this information from the ghost. His uncle did it. Well, it's 1615. Well, it's earlier, but why doesn't he just pick up the knife and go kill the guy? He doesn't. Instead, he decides to put on this antic disposition. Now, why would, and to act crazy, which I think was trendy at the time, being so less so than it is now. Now our, elected officials are zany for their own reasons. But so I thought, like, at each one of these places, like, why doesn't he kill Claudius when he has him praying there? Well, if you're a big Catholic, you're like, well, you can't kill him while he's praying. But I don't really find that terribly playable or relatable. And I think there is plenty in the text and in most contemporary Hamlets that it's just like killing his heart for the first time. So how much of a block do you make of that? How much can you make your own humanity the obstacle to action in this play? And I think that creates a great deal of forward motion. In fact, if you just ask yourself that, why wouldn't I do this now? All the time. And it can make a really, I think, I would hope, a very sort of relatable journey for the Danish dude.
So that's interesting to me. It sounds sort of like, because yes, in terms of the form of the time, I think it would come as no surprise to everybody that the revenge tragedy, there's even a play called Revenge Tragedy, is a pretty standard trope of the period. But Hamlet is a very unique revenger. He's sort of miscast in that role. It sounds like, is what you're saying. It's like, what happens when a revenger is a really modern human who doesn't really want to kill people or be violent, but is being driven to do so anyway. That's a really interesting obstacle. He has all the obstacles that a revenger would normally have, but then he also has these internal hurdles to overcome. Do you think that that's why Hamlet, Shakespeare made him a student, was to push that home?
Yeah, sure. And I'm going to be so wrong about most of this, but isn't Wittenberg is sort of in a sort of more Protestant reform area? So he's been going from this very old world of his father's Denmark, which it sounds much more sort of Catholic and Dark Ages, smoting the sledded Polak on the ice, that sort of heroic version. And then you have on the other side Claudius, who is much more modern, much more of a sort of Renaissance schemer. And I think Hamlet is sort of in between. He's got his one foot in that old sledded Polak world where it's very slippery for his boots, and he wants to put his foot in the more practical, enlightened world on the other side. He's sort of straddling these two worlds, which makes him very modern and conflicted, split.
Yeah, I think you're bang on. I mean, you said you might be wrong, but you're not. And apologies if you can hear the sirens behind. As I've said before, I do record in New York City. But I actually think that divide that you're talking about between the more modern version of Wittenberg and the Catholic of Denmark is also shown in the fundamental concern over the ghost. Is that one of the reasons he doesn't act is he actually cannot be certain that the ghost is his father rather than the devil come to take advantage of him in his melancholy.
Yes.
Because...
No, well, I mean,
go ahead.
Yes. I also think that, I mean, that's the justification. I found in playing it that he can always grab a piece of scripture or superstition or religion when he is not ready to act, when he is that it can be played, that it's too overwhelming, the situation to perform in, and there is always the excuse of, well, it might not work out in the afterlife the way I want it to work out. So those are in those two. But then why does he decide to put on the antic disposition? Both times I got to do it, we made it a very physical thing when the ghost appears, that there's like a physical shock that happens to him that leaves him in a sort of heightened manic state. So there's and the guy's popping up out of the ground over here. I mean, it's pretty freaking crazy what's going on. So you can ride that. I think you can ride that heightened manic, like, oh my God, through until the players come, I think. And the more sane plot of the play within the play comes up. There's also there's also those betrayals in that wonderful huge scene of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, and just Polonius being so. I mean, if he is looking for allegiance in or any person to know what he's going through in everyone, he can be disappointed over and over again into a place of sort of rational grief, where then he's able in Rogue and Peasant Slave to move into more action. Going a little hyper nerdy here, a little fast. I'm going to slow down.
No, it's fine. Please continue, because it's actually a different way in to Hamlet than I'm used to. I'm not used to people. I think it's a really, really interesting argument that the idea that the faith-based arguments are justifications, not real motivation, or that you found it that way, is really fascinating. And therefore, what is his series of motivations, including to go into this antic disposition? It sounds, please correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like you're saying that the antic disposition, the reason he chooses it is because he is feeling crazy.
I think so, and I think I think it's sort of perhaps an indulgent state of grief that he's maybe in during that period. I don't know if indulgent is right, but he is letting himself be in a state of grief, which which we don't find him in the second scene of the play, because there he is mournful in the sort of more classic depressive state, with this burbling disgust at his mother and her behavior. And I was just talking to this other actor, Finn Whitrock, who I grew up with at Shakespeare and Company, who was just going to play Hamlet for a fundraiser at Shakespeare and Company. We were talking about, he was like, well, because he loves his father. And I think because I had more complicated feelings about my father than Finn maybe does about his father, who's a wonderful guy, also was at Shakespeare and Company, Peter Whitrock. I was like, I don't think for me personally, I don't think that he needed to love his father. His father just needed to be the world that he knew. And that world is broken. And then there's all of a sudden this crazy sex that's happening between his mother and this satyr.
Yeah, I think we're getting into why this guy is so complicated, and perhaps why every time he's played he's so unique, because it sounds to me like part of what you're saying is that there's this trope, right, that anytime a character, perhaps with the exception of Iago, speaks in soliloquy, they're telling the full truth. But it sounds to me like you're almost implying that he's an unreliable narrator.
Yeah, go ahead.
Because because in this very speech that you did, he talks about his father as an idealized version, which he then repeats in the chamber scene with Gertrude. But then in the scene where he doesn't kill Claudius, he acknowledges that his father's probably in hell, right? Like, so he kind of dances all over the father issue, which is a little bit so, and I think that the idea that he may be an unreliable narrator, it is the world he knows rather than that this person was a perfect man, is a very interesting thing. But it's a slippery slope, right? Of like, when can we believe what he's saying and when can't we?
I think it's preposterous to say that that they speak the truth in the soliloquies. I think you are.
I'm glad you said that.
I think they are trying to figure out what the truth is during the soliloquy. I mean, we don't. When we're thinking out about a problem, you don't try to lie to yourself. You don't try to, I mean, if you say, and I mean, this comes down to the question of direct address or whether these are internal, I don't know. I found it sort of like impossible to make them internal and not to talk to the audience about the situation that I'm trying to work out emotionally. Like, what am I feeling? Much less what is the right thing to do. So I had this and I argue, the second director I worked with was Dan Sullivan, and he was like, well, it can't be direct address. It can't be. And I was like, okay. But then I did it all direct address, and we never talked about it again. But I think there's like a way. I had this idea, which was helpful for me. God knows if any audience got it at all, but that the audience were his thoughts. The audience is his thoughts. I don't know, plural, singular, but and so he is having a conversation. The audience is in conversation with his. So that when he gets to the final soliloquy, his last lines of direct address to the audience are, "My thoughts be bloody or be nothing worth." And he never talks to him again. He never thinks again, if you will, privately in the play, because he commits himself to revenge at that point. Has committed himself, but is in fact in a state of readiness at that point. This is before the sea fight and all of that. But I think for me, this is again jumping all over the place. But for me, when he finds Claudius, he can kill Claudius. He comes up with this excuse for not killing Claudius because he has never killed anyone at this point, and is so full of self-loathing at that point for reasoning himself yet again out of action, which is what To Be or Not to Be is all about: reasoning yourself out of action. Conscience making cowards of us all. But what is conscience? Then he goes into Gertrude, more full of self-loathing than he has been through the whole play. Here's something in their thing, lashes out, kills somebody. It's so easy. And he's killed kind of the worst person that he could possibly kill, his girlfriend's father. But also the epitome of pedantic small-mindedness too. And so then when he is brought back to Claudius after killing Polonius, it's sort of, I loved To Be Bound at that point, because he has blood on his hands at that point. He is ready to do it in that scene. He gets sent off to England. But what I never liked in seeing, God, I was thinking, have I seen this play before? And I think I do remember one. Oh, he's a good actor. He's a good actor. He did the Prospero for Sam Mendes in that Bridge production. You know who he is. It's on the tip of your tongue too. And he played.
Yes.
He played Virginia Woolf's husband in The Hours. He was so fantastic in that. Stephen Delane.
Is it Stephen
So
Delane?
I did see Stephen Delane do it, and it was just like he gets on the boat, kills some more friends very easily, and or signs their death warrants, and enjoys telling the story of that. I mean, this is a different guy from the guy who's worrying about the Catholicism of killing his uncle. And then but when Stephen Delane did it, he came back in and he was like wearing this sort of Jesus smock. I don't know, maybe I've got this wrong, but like a white thing, like everything had happened, all the change had happened to the character off stage in this sea fight thing. And I was like, it's got to happen on stage. We have to see the maturation of this boy into this man who can kill in front of our eyes, or at least that would be my taste as an audience member, and then actor. That was sort of, I think, that scene, the scene with Gertrude, is so hard. And it's like the crux of the play. Nobody really wants to do it because of frickin' Freud, and not wanting to make this a big Oedipal play because, all of that psychiatry, psychology has been discredited at this point. He's just obsessed with his mommy. But where that scene happens in the play is like structurally, it's the big scene. He has been marching towards her bedchamber this whole time, and it's at the 2/3 point in the play, probably, hopefully 2/3 depending on your cut. And then you can also cling to the idea that Shakespeare was terrible at structure, so maybe that scene is meaningless.
Well, I think if one were to ask, some people think he was one of the great dramaturgical minds that there was. So it's a little bit hard to say, but I think it's actually interesting. Again, going back to the speech we did here, is his mommy issues precede his revenger issues. His mommy issues are in fact in his, what is this in a musical? It's whatever the opposite is of the 11 o'clock number. It's the I'll call it the raison d'etre number, right? The like, here's what totally. I am and here's my problem. And his problem is his mom. When he does his first, and now of course things change, but it is interesting that chamber, the scene in her chamber is we know that's coming from the very first soliloquy. The revenger plot, it starts later.
Yeah, I mean, but there is no revenger. I mean, just to devil's advocate it, there is no revenger's plot at the point of the first soliloquy. We don't have that information.
Correct.
The only information we have at the beginning is that his mom has married his uncle in a month, or a little over 6 weeks, something like that.
Yeah. I don't think I'm disagreeing. I think I'm just saying that in the normal structure of a revenger's tragedy, the event and the motivation to revenge precedes the beginning of the play. And it's interesting here that that Shakespeare takes the time to set up the tension with his mother before he sets up the revenger tension, which is somewhat unique dramaturgically to revenge tragedies, is that you meet Hamlet before the why is this day different from all other days event, which is interesting that Shakespeare felt that was necessary to give us that what's the word for it, that information about where Hamlet's at even before that. I just think it shows how important Shakespeare thought this tension between Hamlet and his mother is to the play he wanted to write.
Right. Well, yes. Cool.
But
that's cool. That's cool. I mean, I do think it's just what he's. I mean, yeah, because when he in the first exchanges with Claudius and Gertrude, he's like a little more than kin and less than kind. I mean, it's just rhetoric. With Claudius, but with her it's like, seems, madam, nay, it is, I know not seems, it's not alone my inky cloak, my suits of solemn, and he can't stop himself when he's talking to her about what's fucked about right now. Excuse me.
And that wonderful moment where, like, after all of that, he still does the I'm paraphrasing, but I will obey you, madam. Like, not Claudius. I will still obey you. I'm still your son, even though I'm furious at you, is a fascinating little tidbit right at the top. There is another woman in his life who falls under this antic disposition question, which I found it interesting that was one of the core pieces of Hamlet's journey that you gravitated to almost immediately, is why does he go antic? And one of the major, I mean, you could argue one of the major victims of his antic disposition phase, though, is Ophelia. There's a number of different interactions he has with Ophelia, including one that we only hear about narrated by Ophelia. And then which is he came to me ungartered and with his shirt untucked, and he grabbed me by the arm and he sighed, and that speech, and then the famous get thee to a nunnery, and then the very weird sort of sexual innuendo flirtation stuff that happen, the no thing jokes that happen in the play within the play, and how that's such a hard relationship because we seem to be dropped into the middle of it. We don't have I'm not even sure we're dropped in the middle. We're dropped into the end of it. Like, we don't seem to have its beginning and middle and end. How did you approach that relationship?
Again, I think just figuring out how much is playable in front of the audience as opposed, and not worrying so much about what happened. I mean, when she says he comes in like that and he's all upset and stuff, I mean, that's sort of from her perspective. I don't love, I mean, easily you can say he's using everyone around to create this smoke screen to keep himself safe from Claudius till he figures out his next move or whatever it is. He could have just come in like really, really upset at this situation and wanted to talk to her. And then she's hearing that he's crazy, and it seems like a crazy person has come in. And so her retelling of it, we don't necessarily have to trust in my version of it. I would prefer, again, to have the scene that we see on stage be the thing where the action is. I think that when he sees her at first coming out of To Be or Not to Be, it's got to be, there has to, I would like there to be a hope to her being a refuge, her being something. And the first thing she does is give back his letters, and it's a breakup scene. And then somewhere along the way during the course of the scene, probably where it shifts from, does it go from where it goes from verse to prose?
There is an adjustment. I think it's right around the line where where's your father?
Ding ding.
Yeah. At home. Yeah. It's talk about stage directions inside the language.
But that he figures out that she's working for someone else. You can easily I think Derek Jacobi did all of To Be or Not to Be to Ophelia, made it a two-person scene, trying to,
Well, and there's that. I'll try to provide this neutrally. I have an opinion about it. There is a relatively well accepted theory among certain crowds that To Be or Not to Be is a performance. That he knows he's being observed.
I think that's a shitty thing to do to a beautiful speech, but sure.
Great. That's exactly what I feel about it. Well, and it's actually the reason I bring it up is because it's something that I just want to mention, because you're coming back to it over and over again. It's very interesting to me that any time that you seem to hate any choice that takes away from the character's vulnerability, because you're like, these kind of Christian justifications, that's justifications for a human flaw. This sort of, sure, maybe he was pushing Ophelia away, but wouldn't it be more interesting if he was trying to come to her? And then again, with this To Be or Not to Be, why do that to this speech? It seems like you're trying to drive towards a certain type of Hamlet who's motivated by and struggles with his own humanity rather than external forces. I wonder, first of all, please correct me if you think I'm putting words in your mouth there. And second of all, why do you consider those choices to be more compelling and playable than the perhaps more intellectual, philosophical choices of religion or manipulation, etc.?
You've plucked out the heart of my mystery. I don't know. The play's too long. The language is too complicated to make it intellectual. I mean, go see a Shaw play. I don't know. It's just, I guess that's just the way that it's made sense. That it made sense for me. And also, I do want to say, like, that perhaps leading with the character's vulnerabilities or humanity or what you will is not taking away the ugliness of the way he treats Ophelia, treats his totally regular guy friends who are just, in a bad situation. He goes high horse and is so disappointed in people's faults. I played Laertes to Liev Schreiber's Hamlet, and I know that he had said, "I see Hamlet as a villain. I'm going to play him as a bad guy." And I don't think that he did. I think he was pretty freaking heroic and impressive, and he beat the shit out of me every night. And maybe that was villainous of him, but I think it was just leading man. I mean, he's a big guy. And I also, but the Hamlets that I have admired the most, this is going to be controversial, because I don't have many stage Hamlets in my head. At Shakespeare and Company, where I grew up, because it was an outdoor space, they did all the forest plays all the time. They never did Hamlet on the main stage. And that's really where my education training comes from. They did it once inside, Shakespeare and Company was at Edith Wharton's house, and they had this inside playing space where they would do adaptations of Edith Wharton and Henry James, and they did a Hamlet in there, which I remember watching and thinking, why is this the great play? This is so strange. The guy was fantastic, John Haddon, who played it, but it was such a weird play, and it wasn't a part or a play that I grew up desperate to play. I was always desperate to play Romeo because there was a big balcony at Shakespeare and Company, and the Romeo would climb the balcony from the outside, and there the sword fight, and there was always just the most beautiful Juliets. So that part made a lot of sense. But Hamlet was never on the big to-do list. So, and I just haven't seen that many for some reason. I don't think I ever will again, but I have seen a bunch of the film ones, and I listened to, not before the first time I played it, but before the second time I played it, I was like, why are you being so precious? Just listen to them all. So I listened to, I think, all the ones that there are recordings of those sort of great ones. And the great relief of listening to them was that they all kind of sounded the same. I mean, every Hamlet is supposed to be a revelation and a revolution that sets fire to the Hamlet that preceded it. But I swear to God, listening to Gielgud and then Olivier next and then Burton next, they all have hints of the same thing, and they're all kind of telling the same story, for my money, in a sort of macro way. But the two Hamlets on film, finally getting back to the point, enough digressions, that I admired the most are sort of opposite sides. One, controversially, I would say, would be Mel Gibson's, because he is so heroic, does the anti-disposition thing. That's like in his wheelhouse, my God. And I understood the play really well when he did it. And the Campbell Scott one, which is criminally underviewed, but I think is probably so well spoken and acted on film. It's like the best Shakespeare acting on film, I think, in a medium close-up. I mean, if you go close up, right, then you're not going to beat Anthony Hopkins. You're not going to beat Paul Scofield. The close up Shakespeare acting on film is manageable and perhaps serves both art forms. But you get into medium close up, you get into wide, and the mediums just hate each other, and it's really hard to play. But Campbell Scott does a really good job. Oh, I saw him on stage. Actually, okay, I have no memory. I saw him on stage play it in Boston, and I didn't like it. And I mean, I was like, I don't know, 16, 17, and I don't even know if we stayed for the second half. Scandal. But then seeing him do it on film, phenomenal.
I want to go back to the idea of Hamlet as not as a villain, but that the Hamlet being vulnerable and uncertain.
I'm sorry, and the reason I brought him up was because he played the intellectual notes, he played the Catholic notes, he plays those notes and totally made it work, as opposed to Mel Gibson, who I'm sure is intellectual in his own moments, but that's not his strength as a performer. Maybe,
right? Definitely more the antics.
Sorry.
Yeah, well, and no, but that's great. I mean, I love that that your two favorite Hamlets are actually, you're kind of explaining two strengths that are not your primary interest in Hamlet, because you're not as interested in that intellectual religious take, and the antic one maybe, but you keep coming back to this vulnerability thing. And I mean, I guess that I would simply say that what it doesn't forgive him his acts, as you say. It just makes him human. Isn't that why we like him? Or like is maybe the wrong word. Isn't that why we're drawn to him? Is because he's uncertain, he doesn't know what to do, and sometimes he
Yeah.
screws up.
Yeah, that's what I would do if I were in that situation. It would take me a while before I was ready to really kill someone, no matter what motivations were.
Yeah. And I mean, it's also, I'm not sure if you've heard the Indiana Jones argument with, what's the one with the Ark? Is it Last Crusade that has the Ark, or I think it's Last Crusade. But with the Ark is that the funny thing about Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade is that the movie would still happen without Indiana Jones. He doesn't affect the plot in any way. That they would still get the Ark, they'd still go to the island, they'd still open the Ark, and they'd all die. That would happen regardless of whether or not Indiana Jones is in that film. And that there is some argument of that in Hamlet as well, that basically the same generic plot would land if Polonius died of a heart attack. Is that the only act that really causes a dramaturgical move in the play that Hamlet does, he does by mistake while talking to his mom. Because if he had done that, Laertes comes back, Laertes attacks the king, there's a rebellion between Laertes and Claudius, and then Fortinbras comes in and takes over. It's the same. And that there's something about this play, about this prince who's got so much to do, and yet he's just a person who tries his best, and it's decent, but it's not, he isn't really a hero, he's just a person. And maybe that's why we're drawn to him in some ways. It sounds like the vulnerable, like the things you're talking about, are very real. It's not, I want to wait to kill Claudius when he's full of sin so that he goes to hell. It's, I can't kill because I'm just a person. And that's, I really like the way you drive to that, because I think that I sometimes struggle to watch Hamlets as well, because I think it is so very hard to play a character who doesn't know what he's doing when you're playing this famous role in front of thousands of people.
I mean, but this is why I say it can't be the navel-gazing version, and it can't be Backfoot, and it can't be that. He isn't aware of his vulnerability. He isn't aware, I don't think, of his fatal flaw, which is his overweening humanity. He is coming up with plans, schemes. He's always moving it forward. So it does make sense to be Mel Gibson and to be pushing the thing. And it does make sense to be Campbell Scott and to be reasoning your way out of these situations using every bit of scripture at hand. He has to stay active. I'm saying that what is behind it for me is just being human. And I mean, he has two things. I mean, he's got to kill. It's so hard to kill Claudia. It's so hard to kill a person, which feels very human. And it's so hard to kill yourself. That is the other absolute side of, and the legitimate fear. He comes back to it over and over again. Why don't I just kill myself? He has that, what's the sort of classic thing of the few people who have survived jumping off the Golden Gate Bridge all report immediate regret while they were in the air. That fear is sanity. And he suffers from an overabundance of sanity, I think, in the play. I don't know.
Yeah. No, I really appreciate, I appreciate the counter, because you're absolutely right that it can't, you're absolutely right that the play dies if he stops trying to act. He must always be trying to act. So he can't, as you say, navel gaze. Do you to take a we're nearing the end of our time, but I wanted to ask just because I'm very interested in your process.
Yeah.
It's different from other people I've spoken to. Do you go? Does it ever help you? Do you find it useful to go broader? Into like, is it helpful to you to think of this play as the playwright's exploration of grief over the loss of his son, or like, do you ever find that gives context to what Shakespeare might be writing, or do you go, no, I want to just be
No,
with the
I
text?
pretend there is no author, that it came from God, that it's a found, that we found these all in a cave. We have no idea who the author is. I mean, I just find it totally. I'm just not that. My mom was a big Oxfordian. My friends kick me in the shin if I say, "Well, Lord Burleigh." Oxford killed Lord Burleigh's page, accidentally, and Oxford's best friend was named Horace. Sounds like Horatio. It's like, who cares? Who cares who it was? They're the best parts and the best words that exist. So let that be enough, I think. And I thought you were going to ask me about my process in terms of learning my lines. That was so funny.
Well, you may be jumping it. I mean, we do like probably a lot of the listeners probably do recognize your last name and would assume that you have strong feelings about how to attack verse and lines, and we haven't talked about it yet. And we don't have much time left, but how deeply do you dive into deep textual verse work, scansion work, antithetical work, rhetorical work, etc.?
I'll tell you very quickly. I did not study with my mom. I mean, the Linklater technique, what Shakespeare and Company does. I grew up around it. I think it went into me by osmosis. But I worked with Sir Peter Hall very early on, and he was so strict about scansion, so strict about breathing at the end of every line. I worked with another company called Original Practices when I first moved to New York, where they just say, all information you have is in your text and the 3-word cue that precedes it. You should listen like a demon, but all the things are there. If there's a period in the middle of the line, you hit the front part of the line and then you rush the second half of the line, all this sort of stuff. But what I do, I get my script, I get my folio, I put in all the capitals, all the punctuation from the folio into my new script. I practice everything with the breath at the end of the line. It makes for me a more natural, less logical read, which I think is more interestingly revealing. I think it's very easy to figure out what the person is saying and to convey what the person is saying. I think it's interesting to figure out who the person is, why they talk the way they do. Everyone talks differently in these plays. And I think I'm actually quite strict with myself so that I can throw those things away. And Peter Hall's whole thing was, and I think John Barton as well, was like, if you abide by these rules, you will have a much more contemporary sound coming out of your mouth, much more contemporary sounding speech coming out of your mouth than you would imagine. That said, working with him, and when you watch those playing Shakespeare tapes or whatever, none of them are fucking doing it. None of them are. They're doing very long sentences very elegantly, and it's been passed down. These are the line readings that have been passed down from Keane to Irving to Terry to Gielgud to whatever. This is not new news, but you're decoding something. So, and I think you put the handcuffs on so you can take them off again. But it was interesting looking at that first speech. I was like, oh, I really did almost all of those. Listeners, when you rewind this podcast and listen, you'll hear me doing little breaths in between heaven and earth. Why would he breathe between heaven and earth? And must I remember? Well, because it's great. And they'll argue about, it's not that you breathe at the end of the line. You breathe at the top of the next line. I don't know what that all means. But if you're breathing, you're probably a human being. And if you're holding your breath, chances are you're a little bit more of a museum piece.
Well, and this is the rather simple version of there is a reason why inspiration is called inspiration, is it's quite literally to inspire, breathe in, and if you don't breathe, you expire and die. So breathing does matter. But the and I also noticed because it's something that I personally I think of the end of the line basically as where you get to think, whether that takes no time or a ton of time. It's where it's often a nice place where someone might think. But I did notice the other version of it, which I rarely see people do, which you talked about kind of speeding through the second half of a line after a midline caesura. I call that an intrusion. The next thought intrudes on the previous one. And I noticed you doing that on the major transition in this speech, which is the that grows to seed, things rank and gross in nature, possess it merely that it should come to this. Is a huge shift in the speech that happens in the middle of a line, and you did not go, oh, that's a period, I have to pause. You just changed your thought. And I found it really, really compelling and interesting that you did that.
Well, because he's talking all this shit about gardens and the everlasting and self. But what's burbling underneath it is that it should come to this. But 2 months dead. It's like, why is that? But you don't figure that. So that's sort of like, that's a way of playing it, which can be fun.
Yeah, and it sounds like what you do with music, right? Is like you start by bonking the music out and really paying attention to the time signature and really paying attention to everything. And then by the time you're actually playing, I hope that's not what you're focusing on.
Go full
right? Like it's that kind of Exactly. Well, I think Hamish, we've basically solved Hamlet in 1 hour.
Great.
Yeah, it's 400 years of questioning about this thing, and all we needed to do was do a podcast for an hour, and we got them all figured out.
Oh God.
Well, and it's one of the things that I always love, that I hope that the audience of this podcast loves, is that there isn't really a right or wrong. There's different versions of true and false and different explorations. And so many amazing actors have such, on the surface, perhaps contradictory ways of exploring, but it's all driving for their truth, for what makes it true for them. And it was really, really fascinating hearing you dig into Hamlet to find your truth and to help other people find theirs when they listen to this. So thank you.
Given the people these plays because they're good for them. Take that, Florida.
Yes. Preach. Well, I think I think we should leave this on take that, Florida.
Please take it, Florida. Take it back, Florida.
Well, thank you so much, Hamish. This has been a wonderful treat. Thank you for sharing your time with us. And hey, the rest is silence.
Yeah, probably.
We hope you've enjoyed this Red Bull Theater podcast. To see what else our theater is up to, please go to redbulltheater.com, where you will be met with a cornucopia of podcasts, readings, classes, seminars, and of course, productions. All of this programming is only possible through the support of people like you. Please make a tax-deductible donation today at redbulltheater.com to support Red Bull Theater and invest in the vitality of classical theater for a contemporary audience. I'm your host, Nathan Winkelstein. Thanks, and ever thanks.